The Frostborn forest had a way of claiming those who entered without hope, and keeping them long after they'd stopped screaming. Its ancient pines stretched towards skies perpetually heavy with storm clouds, never surrendering to warmth or light. Snow fell in endless silence, each flake a whispered warning, and the air carried a cold so profound it turned breath to ice crystals and made wolf blood freeze in mortal veins. It was a place of haunting beauty and certain death, where the boundary between the living world and the realm of eternal winter grew thin enough to shatter. But the real danger wasn't the cold. It was the king who ruled it, the creature who'd turned grief into a weapon so devastating it had transformed an entire forest into his personal graveyard. 400 years of bodies marked his borders, ice-preserved warnings to anyone foolish enough to seek the cursed king. Some had come begging for mercy. Others had come hunting glory. All of them had died screaming his name, frozen mid-plea, their terror crystallized for eternity. Cale Nightborn didn't grant mercy anymore. He collected tragedies instead. Selene Ravenscar had no business being there, and she no longer cared. Oh, her boots, once sturdy leather fit for an Omega's duties, were now cracked and bloodstained from the rejection ceremony. Her brown cloak, heavy with accumulated snow, had been torn during her pack's brutal exile ritual, and beneath it, her skin bore fresh wounds, teeth marks and claw scratches that spelled out her banishment in the language all wolves understood. She was 24 winters old, though her eyes held the devastation of someone who had died inside months ago. She had been cast out from the Ravenscar pack 3 months prior, accused of betraying her mate after Damien fell defending their territory. Alpha Theron had claimed she'd revealed patrol routes to enemies, that her weakness had led to her mate's death. The rejection ceremony had been theatrical in its cruelty, each pack member taking their turn, teeth and claws writing her crimes into flesh, while Theron watched with the satisfied expression of a man eliminating a problem. Grief had a way of turning tragedy into blame, and Selene had learned that love could become a weapon when those in power needed a scapegoat for their failures. The Frostborn had not been a refuge, it had been a choice. The only choice she had left. She'd walked deliberately toward the one place no wolf survived, toward the forest that promised to erase her existence so thoroughly that even her memory would freeze and shatter like ice. Past the frozen corpses that marked the boundaries, their faces locked in eternal screams, hands reaching toward escape they'd never found. Past the warning signs carved into trees, turn back. He shows no mercy. Death comes slowly here. She'd read every word and kept walking. When the storm intensified and her legs finally gave out, she'd climbed into the massive branches of an ancient pine, seeking shelter not from the cold, but from consciousness itself. The snow-laden boughs formed something almost like a cradle, or perhaps a coffin. She no longer cared which. Exhaustion and hypothermia had become her only companions, and tonight she would surrender to them both. Selene had no fire to gather, no warmth to create. The Frostborn killed flames as quickly as hope. Instead, she curled into the crook of the branch, her tears freezing on her cheeks before they could fall, and let the storm swallow her sobs. The wind howled through the pines like the morning songs she'd sung for Damien, and for a moment she felt almost at peace. She would die here, and no one would blame her for another death. She didn't know she was being watched. She didn't know that she'd made a fatal mistake, not in coming to the Frostborn to die, but in climbing into his tree. The very pine where Cale Nightborn had stood vigil since the night his family's blood had painted the snow red and his grief had exploded into a curse that turned an entire forest into his kingdom of ice and death. Directly below her position, standing motionless in the falling snow like a predator carved from winter itself, Cale Nightborn observed the Omega Wolf with something that made his ancient blood burn despite the ice in his veins. Recognition. Hunger. Mine. He had ruled the Frostborn territory for 4 centuries, And in all that time, no wolf had ventured this deep into his cursed domain and remained breathing. The forest itself was an extension of his will, turning away those who sought him and freezing those who persisted until they became warnings for others. He'd watched hundreds die over the centuries, some quickly when he was feeling merciful, others slowly when he wanted to savor their fear. He'd stopped feeling guilty about it 200 years ago. Yet this woman had walked through barriers that should have repelled her, past the frozen corpses of those who'd tried before, directly to the heart of his territory, where the curse ran strongest, where he was strongest. She'd climbed into his tree, the sacred place where he kept vigil over his dead. And instead of fleeing his presence like every instinct should have screamed at her to do, she'd simply wept. Wept like her heart was breaking, wept like she wanted to die. And for the first time in 2 centuries, Cale Nightborn felt his frozen heart crack. Not with compassion, but with something far more dangerous. Possession. She didn't know it yet, but she'd stopped belonging to death the moment she'd entered his forest. The Frostborn didn't release what it claimed, and neither did he. He'd watched her for 6 hours now, standing motionless as snow accumulated on his shoulders like a burial shroud. Watched her tears freeze on her skin, watched her breathing grow shallow with hypothermia. Watched her lips turn blue as death circled closer, patient and inevitable. He could let her die. Should let her die. His curse killed everything he touched. Lovers, allies, anyone foolish enough to get close. For 4 centuries he'd been a creature of winter and death, turning everything beautiful into ice, everyone who loved him into corpses. But as dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of blood and ash, as her breathing became dangerously shallow and her heartbeat stuttered towards silence, Cale Nightborn made a decision that would damn them both. He couldn't let her die. Not because he was merciful, mercy had frozen out of him long ago. Not because he was kind. Kindness was for wolves who hadn't spent 2 centuries building kingdoms from corpses. He couldn't let her die because the moment she'd climbed into his tree and wept her broken heart into his eternal winter, something ancient and irrevocable had snapped into place inside him, something that made his curse roar to life with recognition that defied logic and reason. Mate bond. He'd felt it once before, centuries ago, before the massacre that had killed his entire family and frozen his heart into ice. He'd thought that capacity dead, murdered along with everything else he'd loved. He'd been wrong, and that made her the most dangerous thing that had entered his forest in 400 years. Not because she could kill him, but because she could make him want to live again. Which meant she couldn't be allowed to leave. Ever. Frost crystallized beneath his boots as he moved, silent as death, positioning himself directly beneath her branch. His silver hair caught the dawn light like fresh snow stained with blood. And his eyes, winter storm grey that hadn't held warmth in 2 centuries, fixed on her with an intensity that would have terrified her if she'd been conscious enough to feel it. She was about to discover that the Frostborn forest claimed those who entered without hope. But Cale Nightborn claimed something far more permanent. He claimed souls, and he'd just decided hers belonged to him. Celine's thoughts drifted through the haze of cold like fragments of a shattered mirror. Damien's face laughing in morning sunlight, his hand in hers during their mating ceremony, his body torn and broken carried back to their den on a stretcher of shame. 3 months had passed since that terrible dawn when Alpha Theron had summoned her before the pack, his voice ringing with accusation. She told them our roots. Her weakness killed your brother, your mate, your defender. The rejection ceremony had been brutal and efficient, each pack member taking their turn, teeth and claws writing her crimes into flesh, while Theron watched with cold satisfaction. She hadn't fought back. Part of her believed she deserved it. If she'd been stronger, faster, better, maybe Damien would still be alive. She'd walked for weeks afterward, deliberately seeking the Frostborn. Everyone knew it was where wolves went to disappear forever. The storm had hit as darkness fell, and climbing had been instinct rather than plan. Now, curled in the frozen branches, her tears came in broken sobs that carved pain through her chest. "I'm sorry, Damien. I'm so sorry." Below, Kyle Nightborn stood perfectly still, snow accumulating on his shoulders like a burial shroud. He'd been drawn by the sound of weeping, a noise so foreign to his frozen domain it had pulled him from Ice-Morn Keep like a siren's call. When he'd found her in his tree, the one where he kept vigil over his grief, something impossible had struck him with the force of a death blow. Mate bond. The recognition burned through him like poison, unwanted, unavoidable, and utterly damning. He'd felt it once before, centuries ago, before the massacre that killed his entire family and turned his heart to ice. The curse had made him a creature of winter and death. Everything he touched turned to frost. Everyone he loved perished in cold. He'd spent 200 years perfecting the art of not caring, of watching wolves freeze without flinching, of building kingdoms from corpses without guilt. He should walk away. Let the forest claim her, as it had claimed so many others. But for 6 hours he stood watch, unable to move, unable to leave, not from compassion, but from something far more selfish. His silver hair caught falling snow as one truth became undeniable. She'd walked into his territory seeking death, and he was about to teach her that some fates were worse than dying. Dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of blood. Selene's breathing had grown dangerously shallow, her lips blue with hypothermia. Kyle's decision crystallized like ice. He couldn't let her die. Not because he was merciful, because she was his now, his mate, his possession, his curse to bear. Even if claiming her meant condemning her to an existence she'd never escape. Ice crystallized beneath Kale's boots as he raised his hand, frost spiraling upward to form stairs that gleamed like frozen moonlight. Each step solidified with a whisper of ancient magic as he climbed toward the woman who had somehow become his entire world in the span of a single night. Whether she wanted to be or not, Selene stirred as he reached for her, her eyes fluttering open, then widening in absolute terror. She knew that silver hair, those eyes like winter stars. Every wolf in every territory knew the legend of Kale Nightborn, the cursed king whose touch brought death. "Don't fight me, little wolf," he said softly, gathering her into his arms despite her weak attempt to pull away. His grip was iron wrapped in silk, gentle enough not to bruise, firm enough to make escape impossible. "You're too cold for even my curse to harm, for now." But as he lifted her against his chest, both of them froze for an entirely different reason. She'd expected killing frost, ice spreading through her veins to finish what hypothermia had started. Instead, warmth bloomed where his hands touched her, genuine heat that felt like standing before a summer fire. "Impossible. What are you?" Kyle breathed, staring down at her with something between wonder and possession. His touch had frozen everything for 2 centuries. Lovers, allies, anyone foolish enough to get close. Yet this broken Omega radiated warmth against his curse like sunlight melting snow, and the hunger that stirred in him was anything but gentle. He carried her swiftly to a cave shelter carved into the mountainside, and for the first time in 200 years, built a fire without flinching from the flames. Selene watched in stunned silence before the story poured from her in broken fragments. Damien's death, Theron's accusations, the rejection ceremony's brutality. Rage colder than his curse settled over Kyle's features. Not compassion, ownership. Someone had damaged what was his before he'd even known she existed. "You'll come to Ice-Morn Keep," he said, his voice carrying absolute authority that allowed no refusal. "You'll be safe in my winter." "Why would you help me?" Selene whispered, tears streaming down her frostbitten cheeks. "Everyone knows you're cursed to bring only death." Something dark shifted in Kyle's ancient eyes, something that should have terrified her. Then perhaps death found something worth keeping alive. As he reached out to wipe away her tears, his fingers trailed across her skin, possessive, claiming. Where they touched, the frost in his veins receded, replaced by heat that felt dangerously like need. For the first time in 2 centuries, Kyle Nightborn felt warmth, and he would burn the world down before letting it go. The journey to Ice-Morn Keep revealed a landscape frozen in perpetual twilight. As they travelled, Kyle spoke quietly of his curse, how grief over his family's massacre had erupted in a wave of ice magic so powerful it had frozen the entire forest. "I've kept it contained for 2 centuries, he said, his voice carrying the weight of ages. But containment isn't control, it's simply existence. What he didn't say, he'd learned to enjoy the power, the fear, the absolute dominion over life and death. When the palace emerged through the snow, Selena's breath caught. Massive towers of ice and black stone rose against the storm-laden sky, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, like a cathedral built to worship winter itself, or a prison disguised as salvation. The council's reaction to her arrival was immediate and hostile. Frostguard Korvax stepped forward, his face twisted with fury. "My king, this is madness! 2 curses do not cancel each other. She'll amplify your frost. She'll kill us all." Kyle's silver hair began to glow with lethal power, frost spreading across the throne room floor in a wave of dominance that made several council members stumble backward. "She is under my protection. Challenge that. Challenge me." His voice dropped to something deadly soft. "And I promise, my curse will seem merciful compared to what I'll do." The council bowed, but their fear remained palpable. They recognized the look in their king's eyes. Possession, not compassion. Elder Astrid treated Selena's wounds with reluctant efficiency, her aged hands surprisingly gentle, despite the coldness in her eyes. Palace staff whispered as Selene was led to guest chambers, beautiful rooms with locked doors and guards posted outside. For her protection, Kyle had said. It felt like captivity wrapped in silk. That first night, Selene discovered something extraordinary. Walking the corridors, testing whether she was truly free to roam, she noticed ice forming wherever Kyle had passed. But when she stepped in those same places, the frost melted beneath her boots, leaving bare stone behind. She was still examining this phenomenon when nightmares found her. Damien's death played behind her eyelids in visceral detail until she woke screaming. Kyle appeared in her doorway instantly. Drawn by distress, he felt through a bond neither fully understood. "I feel your pain through the bond," he said, crossing to her bed without asking permission. "Let me help bear it." It wasn't a question. As he gathered her into his arms, grip firm, possessive, his confession came like a dark promise. "They're wrong, Selene. You don't amplify my curse. You're melting it. Which means I can never let you go." Hours later, as Astrid examined Selene's blood, her face went white. "Child, you carry lunar wolf magic, the bloodline that was supposed to be extinct, and if anyone discovers this, they'll kill you to keep you from breaking the ancient curses." She didn't add the obvious. Kyle had just found the one thing more valuable than power, a cure he could possess forever. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm of possession disguised as healing. Each morning, Kyle met Selene in the training courtyard, teaching her to control powers she hadn't known existed. His hands lingered too long during demonstrations, his body positioned too close behind hers, his breath hot against her neck as he murmured instructions that felt dangerously like seduction. His touch brought impossible warmth, melting centuries of ice, while her presence transformed his killing frost into something gentler, protective rather than destructive. But protection, Selene was learning, could be another form of control. The pack began to notice. Wherever Kyle and Selena spent time together, tiny flowers pushed through the snow, their delicate petals defying the eternal winter. Kyle found himself making excuses to seek her out. his obsession growing with each passing day. When she laughed, truly laughed for the first time since arriving, something possessive and primal roared to life inside him. Meanwhile, Cale's investigation into Damien's death revealed disturbing inconsistencies. He told himself it was for justice. The truth was darker. He needed to know everything about the mate who died because jealousy of a dead man was eating him alive. The poisoned meal came during dinner. Kyle's heightened senses caught the scent of wolfsbane a heartbeat before Selene could take a bite. He swept the plate away with such force it shattered against the wall, his rage exploding through the hall like a winter storm. "Someone in my territory tried to harm what's mine." His voice carried enough power to crack the ice columns supporting the ceiling. The possessive fury in his tone made it clear. This wasn't about her safety. It was about someone touching his property. Later, in her chambers, Selene finally broke. Kyle held her as she sobbed, his arms the only sanctuary she'd known in months, and the most dangerous cage she'd ever entered. "Why me?" she whispered against his chest. "Why would fate bind you to someone already broken?" Kyle tilted her face up, his eyes blazing with something between devotion and madness. "Because you're the only one brave enough to love winter and warm enough to survive it. And because I'll destroy anyone who tries to take you from me." When their lips met, the aurora borealis exploded across the sky in waves of silver and gold. The mate bond snapped into place with such force it drove them both to their knees, souls recognizing what their minds had feared to accept. He kissed her like a man claiming salvation. She kissed him back like a woman surrendering to damnation. The next morning the message arrived carved in ice. "The lunar wolf belongs to us. Return her to Alpha Theron for execution, or we bring war to your frozen kingdom. You have until the winter solstice. 7 days." Kyle read it once, then let it shatter beneath his fist. They could come. He'd paint the snow red with anyone who tried to take her. The winter solstice gathering convened on neutral ground, every major alpha in attendance. Kyle's decision to bring Selene was a declaration of war disguised as diplomacy, and everyone knew it. She wore silver that matched his hair perfectly, the gown flowing like liquid moonlight. His claiming bite marked her throat in vivid contrast to her pale skin, fresh enough that blood still seeped from the wound, visible proof of his possession. The moonstone circlet resting on her brow proclaimed her status to anyone with eyes. Lunar Queen of the Frostborn. His property. His cure. His obsession made flesh. The moment they entered, silence fell like an executioner's blade. Alpha Theron stood among the assembled leaders, his face contorting with rage at the sight of the Omega he'd tried to destroy, now wearing a crown. "You harbor a traitor and murderer," Theron snarled, stepping forward. "That Omega belongs to Ravenscar Pack for judgment and execution." Cale's smile was colder than his curse, darker than death. "She belongs to me." He placed his hand against Selene's throat, possessive, claiming, his fingers pressing against the bite mark he'd left. "She's my mate, my Luna, my cure." Where he touched her, his silver hair showed dark roots emerging, visible proof his ancient curse was breaking. "Touch her, and I'll show you what 4 centuries of winter can do to flesh." The alphas erupted in chaos. Some saw opportunity in the division. Others recognized the madness in the cursed king's eyes, the look of a man who would burn the world for one woman. Theron's voice cut through the noise. "I invoke trial by moon. The ancient judgment ritual. Single combat. Winner takes all. If Kyle won, all claims on Selene would be void. If he lost, she returned to Theron for execution." "Accepted," Kyle said without hesitation. His hand tightened on Selene's throat, not enough to hurt, just enough to remind her who she belonged to now. Later, in the privacy of their chambers, Selene trembled against him. "What if—" "I was dead for 200 years," Kyle interrupted, cradling her face in his hands with a grip that bordered on bruising. You brought me back to life. I won't lose you. I can't lose you. I'll go mad without you. Their kiss was fierce and desperate, possession meeting surrender as the northern lights blazed overhead in silver and gold. When they emerged, Kyle made his formal claim before every assembled alpha, his voice carrying the weight of obsession, his eyes promising murder to anyone who challenged him. As they left the gathering, Astrid pulled them aside with trembling hands. I know what really happened the night Kyle's family died, and it's the same conspiracy that killed Selene's mate. They're eliminating anyone who could unite the packs. Kyle's rage crystallized into something deadly cold. Someone had orchestrated his curse. Someone had murdered his mate's first love. Someone was about to learn that the cursed king's mercy had died 2 centuries ago. Astrid's revelation shattered everything they thought they knew. Lunar wolves had once been peacekeepers, their magic capable of breaking ancient curses and uniting fractured packs. But a conspiracy of alphas who profited from territorial division had systematically hunted the bloodline to extinction. Damien discovered what you were, Astrid said, her voice breaking. He was murdered before he could reveal the truth and protect you. Kyle's fury was a palpable force, not grief for a fallen wolf, but rage that someone had touched what was his before he'd claimed it. My family? The same conspiracy. They needed you cursed, isolated, your territory feared. 2 centuries of grief, weaponized by traitors. The council meeting erupted in violence when Korvac stepped forward, his confession cold and clinical. I was paid handsomely to keep you alone, my king, to ensure the Frostborn remained separate from... He never finished. Kyle's ice magic slammed him against the wall with lethal force, frost crawling up his body while he screamed. The battle was brief and brutal, ending with Korvac's frozen mid-plea and 3 council members dead, their bodies left as warnings in the throne room. The blood moon ceremony will awaken your full power, Astrid told Selene later. But there's risk. If the magic is too strong, it could kill you. If it fails, it might complete Kyle's curse permanently. Or bind you to him forever, she didn't add. Make escape impossible. That evening, Kyle took Selene to the heart tree, a massive pine frozen solid, its branches crystallized mid-sway. This is where my family died, where my grief exploded into the curse. His voice was raw with emotion that bordered on obsession. I buried my heart here 200 years ago, but you've made it beat again. His hand found her throat possessive. You've made me feel again. Selene placed her hand over his chest, feeling the warmth there, warmth she'd created simply by existing. Then let's set it free together. Their vows were exchanged in whispers. His claim, her acceptance, their shared certainty that they would survive together or fall together. What she heard as devotion, he meant as promise. You're mine, in life or death, forever. The assassination attempts came in waves over the following days, the palace under constant siege. Each attack made Kyle more possessive, more violent, more convinced that the only way to keep her safe was to never let her out of his sight. As the blood moon rose red over the Frostborn forest, they walked to the heart tree. Selena whispered, "If I don't survive this..." Kyle silenced her with a kiss that tasted like desperation and darkness. "Then I don't either. Where you go, I follow, even into death." His grip tightened on her waist. "You don't get to leave me. Not now. Not ever." It should have sounded romantic. Instead, it sounded like a vow from a man who would drag her soul back from the afterlife, rather than exist without her. The clearing around the heart tree filled with loyal pack members, their faces illuminated by the crimson moon hanging overhead like a wound in the sky. Selene stood in white, Kyle in black, perfect opposites preparing to become one, bound by magic that would make separation impossible. Astrid began the ancient ritual, her voice carrying power that made the air shimmer. The moment she invoked Selene's bloodline, pain exploded through Selene's body, lunar fire burning through her veins like molten silver. She screamed, and Kyle's curse responded violently, frost spreading from him in waves that turned the ground to ice. Fire and ice collided. The forest shook, and Kyle held her through it all with a grip that would leave bruises, possessive even in her agony. Theron's attack came precisely as planned, mid-ritual, when they were most vulnerable. His strike force crashed through the trees with savage efficiency. Battle erupted around them, but Kyle never left Selene's side, his ice magic cutting down enemies with brutal efficiency. Bodies fell, blood stained the snow, and his eyes blazed with the madness of a man protecting what he'd claimed. Selene's eyes blazed silver as lunar marks spiraled across her skin like living tattoos. Her power fully manifested in silver flames that didn't burn but healed, ancient magic responding to ancient need. She turned that power on Kale. Instead of harming, the lunar fire melted through his curse like spring sunlight through snow. His silver hair darkened from the roots, black bleeding through the white. His ice-cold eyes warmed to summer storm grey. Their powers merged, winter that protected instead of killed, eternal snow that nourished rather than destroyed. But something else happened too. The bond completed with such force, it drove them both to their knees, souls fusing together until neither could exist without the other. She felt his obsession become hers. He felt her surrender become his salvation. They were one now, irrevocably, eternally. Theron lunged for Selena's throat. Kyle's ice spear caught him mid-leap, freezing him solid before he shattered into 1,000 pieces. The violence in Kyle's expression was terrifying. This was the cursed king who'd built kingdoms from corpses, and he'd just reminded everyone why they feared him. The heart tree, frozen for 2 centuries, suddenly bloomed. White flowers burst from crystallized branches, their petals catching moonlight as the ancient pine came back to life. The curse wasn't just broken. It was transformed into something darker, more powerful. As the ceremony completed, Kyle and Selene stood united, their powers flowing between them like breathing. When they turned to face their kingdom, every wolf in the clearing was bowing, recognizing their true Alpha King and Lunar Queen. Kyle's hand found Selene's throat in a gesture that was both tender and possessive. She'd come to his forest seeking death. Instead, she'd found something far more permanent, a king who would never let her go. The battle's aftermath revealed the full extent of their transformation. Kyle's hair had settled into rich black, with silver streaks that caught the light like frost on midnight water. His curse wasn't gone. It was controlled, winter magic that answered to obsession rather than grief. Selene's lunar wolf power stabilized into something magnificent, silver fire that flowed through her veins like liquid moonlight. But the bond had changed her too. She felt his possessiveness like a second heartbeat, his need for her like oxygen in her lungs. Separation was no longer just painful. It was impossible. Word spread quickly. Within days, delegations arrived from territories that had remained divided for centuries, all seeking to unite under the rule of the cursed king who'd found his cure, and claimed her so completely that the entire supernatural world had felt the shockwave. The coronation ceremony drew wolves from every pack. Selene knelt before the assembled masses as Kyle placed the Lunar Queen's crown upon her head, moonstone and ice crystal woven together in impossible beauty. Their vows, exchanged before united packs, sealed a bond so complete they could feel each other's emotions, share strength across any distance, exist as one soul in 2 bodies. She was his. He was hers. Forever had become literal. The frostborn forest itself transformed. Eternal winter remained, but now it was life-giving. Snow that nourished rather than killed, cold that protected rather than destroyed. Persecuted wolves began arriving, seeking sanctuary in the one place that had always meant death, but now promised home under the rule of a king who understood what it meant to be broken. The 3-day celebration saw Kyle laugh for the first time in 2 centuries, then weep openly as he held Selene beneath the constant aurora. She watched him discover emotions he'd thought frozen forever, while she grew into confidence that would have seemed impossible months ago, from broken Omega to powerful queen standing beside a king who would burn the world for her. New laws were established protecting all wolves regardless of rank. Memorials honoured Damien and Kale's family, the ghosts who had brought them together through tragedy. Standing on the balcony of Icemorn Keep, watching Aurora dance across their kingdom, Kale's hand wrapped possessively around Selene's waist. "I spent 200 years as winter. You taught me to be spring." Selene smiled, guiding his hand to rest against her stomach where new life had begun to form, proof that their dark romance had created something beautiful. "Then let's create summer together." His kiss was fierce, claiming, a reminder that she'd walked into his forest seeking death and found something far more permanent, a love that was equal parts salvation and damnation, a bond that would last beyond mortality. She'd melted the cursed king's heart, and in return, he'd claimed her soul completely. 3 years had transformed the Frostborn from a realm of death into a sanctuary of hope. Though some whispered it was simply a prettier cage, ruled by a king whose obsession had found a socially acceptable outlet, Selene had grown fully into her role as Lunar Queen, her confidence radiating through united territories that thrived under their combined rule. Eternal winter remained, but now it symbolized protection, a promise that the broken would always find shelter here, under the watchful eyes of a king who understood possession disguised as devotion. Their twin pups embodied that promise perfectly. Lyra had inherited Selene's warm brown eyes and Kyle's silver-streaked black hair, while Demon possessed his father's storm-grey eyes and his mother's gentle warmth. Both showed early signs of combined lunar and frost magic, power that would make them formidable and ensure no one could ever challenge their parents' rule. Kyle was unrecognizable from the frozen king who'd stood vigil beneath a tree 3 years prior. He was warm now, present, chasing squealing pups through drifts while Selene watched with a smile that still had the power to melt him completely. But in quiet moments, she still felt the intensity of his need for her, a bond so complete that separation remained physically painful, a reminder that what they'd built was as much addiction as love. They visited the heart tree often, the ancient pine that bloomed year-round now, white flowers defying winter as testament to love's victory over curse. Today, with snow falling gently around them, they told their children the story of how broken things could become beautiful, how the coldest curse could birth the warmest blessing, how a woman who'd come seeking death had found a king who refused to let her go. In the memorial grove where flowers bloomed eternal for Damien and Kyle's lost family, Selena touched the stone marker with reverence. "He would have loved them," she whispered. "He made this possible," Kyle replied, pulling her close with possessive tenderness. His death revealed the conspiracy. His love for you never wavered, even in how he died. Even now, jealousy of a dead man flickered through their bond, a darkness she'd learned to accept as part of loving winter incarnate. As northern lights danced overhead and their kingdom prospered below, wolves from every territory finding home in eternal winter, the family stood together. "Your tears saved me that night," Kyle murmured, his hand finding her throat in that familiar gesture of ownership and affection. "Your vigil saved me," Selene responded, leaning into the touch that had once terrified her and now felt like home. "What happened next?" the twins asked in unison. Together their parents smiled. "We learned that the coldest winter can birth the warmest spring, and that sometimes salvation and damnation are the same thing." Thank you for joining us in the Frostborn Forest, where tears became chains of silk Winter became home, and two cursed souls found salvation in mutual obsession. If this dark romance touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more tales where love conquers darkness, or becomes it. Remember, sometimes the deepest freeze doesn't want to thaw. Sometimes it just wants to hold you forever.